as an entrepreneur for the last 25 years. After getting a BBA and then MBA at Pace, I did a short stint in the Toyota Management Training Program and also was a product manager at Godiva Chocolate. But I sort of had it in my blood that I wanted to be in my own business, and had some tremendous successes over the years and some horrible, horrible failures. So my success has sort of been a yo-yo. And I think one thing we can learn, and of course you're very interested in entrepreneurship, and that's great, it's rarely a straight linear path upwards. And the thing that I've learned is that you've got to be expecting the unexpected. Andy Grove, of course, the great entrepreneur at Intel, said that only the paranoid survive. I strongly recommend that you adhere to that credo as well, because there are lots of roadblocks that are going to come in your direction. So in recent years, I've worked with the inventor of Take and Slide, which is an adherence tool that you put on a medication bottle. It's patented, and you go just simply like this for each day of the week. And it reminds you to take your medications. And we've had some significant success with that. We've sold hundreds and hundreds of thousands of units. We have a test that we did with CVS and pharmaceutical companies such as J&J and Astellas and Supernus, Synovian are purchasing very large quantities of this adherence tool. And adherence right now in the healthcare category is extremely important, because if patients take their medications properly, they're less likely to have hospitalizations and other bad health outcomes. So this is something that I still do in earnest. So that's my healthcare background. A couple of years ago, my son, who was a high school student, said to me, "Dad, there are kids in my class that are taking prescription drugs illicitly from their friends' parents' medicine cabinets and also from their own parents' medicine cabinets." And of course I had read all about that, I'm sure you have as well, and it's a scary thing because you think of the opioid epidemic, which today is even more tragic than it was a few years ago. So I was thinking to myself, and not terribly high tech, yes, I know how to use Word and Excel, and I'm very good in searching the internet, but that's about my knowledge of tech. I said, wouldn't it be great, looking at my iPhone, if I could receive a notification if a kid was accessing my medicine cabinet before it becomes a serious problem? So I was then Googling and saying, no one has this. And I was very excited and very passionate about it, because my son was telling me of kids who were doing this, and I knew the kids and I knew the families, and these are good families and good kids. Good kids make bad decisions. So I was just thinking this would just be really, really impressive. And I have a healthcare background, so I have connections where this kind of product could possibly be well received. So I got very excited about the concept, knew nothing about tech, didn't know what firmware was, barely knew what hardware was. So I went to a friend of the family who graduated from MIT with a PhD, and sat down with him and I said, look, is this something that I could do? Is it possible? Is it feasible? Can it be done inexpensively? And he said, yes, the hardware has changed dramatically in recent years, where 2 or 3 years earlier it would be more difficult and challenging, but yeah, you can do it. So I then assembled a team, a marketing guy, Mike Harry, who's done a wonderful job in the packaging and the UX. Also got a hardware guy, KK, who's located in Hong Kong, has a master's degree in electrical engineer, also educated in the States. I found through a close friend of mine a fantastic manufacturer in China, Shenzhen, Danny Chan, who has done a lot of medical device work, came highly recommended by my friend as a very honest and high-quality manufacturer doing this for 35 years. And then, of course, there was myself. Oh, and then also we found Pranay Mathur in Rajasthan, India, who managed the app development and also the firmware development. And firmware is basically the software that gets burned onto the chip and instructs the hardware, how to function. So with this team, and each of the members of the team received varying degrees of equity, we decided then to launch a crowdfunding campaign. Crowdfunding seemed very exciting. It was, very much talked about. We had two options we thought at the time. It was Kickstarter and Indiegogo. Slava Rubin over at Indiegogo, who was the co-founder of Indiegogo and also the president of Indiegogo, wooed us with personal calls and said, hey, you got to come with us. We were going to go with Kickstarter, but he made some enticing offers and we said, okay, we're going to go with Indiegogo. He delivered for us press. His team offered us wise counsel since we were neophytes in that area. And it was the right decision, even though Kickstarter is equivalent in my view in many ways, but for us this was the right decision. So Mike Harry, who I had met through the School of Visual Arts, created a crowdfunding video. And I'm going to now play for you the video.
Oval, a smart, easy-to-use, and versatile sensor designed to protect the people and things you care about most. It's small, discreet, and easily adheres to almost any object, sending an alert to your phone or email whenever its sensors are disturbed. Protect your loved ones by attaching Oval to items such as medicine and liquor cabinets, toxic chemicals, and other potentially dangerous items in your home. Monitor items in your business, dorm, or home by placing Oval sensors on your doors, windows, valuables, computers, or anywhere else. Oval sensors talk to your gateway through a wireless network. And because the sensors utilize cloud technology, you can receive a notification, text, email, or even a pre-programmed phone call anywhere in the world instantly. Easily monitor and control your sensors from anywhere through the Oval website or with our smartphone app. And Oval is not just limited to sensing motion. Be notified of changes in light, temperature, moisture, or proximity. Oval is not just another gadget. It's a high-quality, industrial-standard professional sensor that's easy to use and a great way to protect the people and things you care about most. Oval. How will you use it?
So that was the video campaign that we used to launch the Indiegogo presentation. And we raised $50,000. We made a lot of errors. One of the things that we found out after the fact is that you've got to focus in the first 24 to 48 hours on sales velocity and generate a lot of business initially. Should have, instead of talking to friends and family and saying, in the next 30 days, make sure you order Oval, we should have said, make sure you order Oval today, since you're intending to do it anyway. So that was one error where we should have maybe generated $10,000 to $15,000 of business day one. That attracts the press. It also, I guess through the crowdfunding algorithms, puts you to the top. That could have led to, instead of doing $50,000, maybe $300,000 or $400,000. So that was one critical error. Now, unfortunately, with crowdfunding at the time, and I don't think PACE offers it or any other business school, there's no such thing as crowdfunding 101 yet. And we can't go to textbooks and read Peter Drucker and say, hey, how do we do crowdfunding? Okay, so this was a new platform that we had to sort of learn by talking to others. The one nice thing is that 95% of crowdfunding projects don't reach their goal. So to raise $50,000 wasn't a bad achievement. It was pretty significant. So we were very happy. We raised that amount. I collaborated with the team. Most of the team, was willing to either do work for free, gratis in exchange for equity. Mike put in additional money, significant money, so that we would have enough money to reach the manufacturing goal. Our manufacturer gave huge concessions in China, and some of you are Asian, and you know that MOQs, minimum order quantities, are typically very high, and they don't like to work with new companies because the R&D cycle is very, very long, and there's a question mark whether it'll even go. So after 3 years, we thought it would be 1 year. After 3 years, we finally were successful and created a product that really was good. And what I'm going to do is show you, this is the gateway, and that connects through an Ethernet cable to your router, and then it goes to the cloud, and then the cloud goes to your phone and notifies you. Here's the sensor, which detects motion, light, temperature, proximity. We also have a flood sensor, excuse me?
Flood and moisture.
Flood and moisture, and then we have the humidity. And there are just so many use cases. So what I'm going to do is just pass the different products we have around, so that as I'm talking, just pass them around so you can get a feel. And look at the fit and finish. I mean, it is really, it's not Apple quality, but it's at Samsung, and it's tier 1. And we've had that evaluated by experts in the field, and they're surprised with a minimum order quantity of 500 units that we were able to do that. I found an industrial engineer who did a lot of medical device work in the States. Great work. And I negotiated him down to $25 an hour. So you have to be a salesman. We got an attorney. I also found an attorney, Stanford grad, at such a discount that he believed it, and I said, look, and I'm very truthful, once we're successful, your rates will go up to a normal rate. Pranay believed in it as well and gave us a rate that's a fraction of what it would normally cost us for firmware and for software. And Danny, I assume, probably saved us $200,000, including KK, who was the electrical engineer that worked full-time for 2 years, 40 hours a week, for some equity, and believing in this. So that was an exciting opportunity. Now, bear in mind, again, as I mentioned to you before, I have no knowledge of tech. And we're dealing with different countries all over the world. We've got Rajasthan, we've got Hong Kong, we have Shenzhen, and then we have the States. So we have to make sure that everybody is working towards the objective of getting this completed. And there were so many roadblocks, and what I learned in tech development, I had been involved in a lot of different low-tech products in the past, is that if you're 95% completed, that doesn't mean that only 5% of the time is left. It could mean that you still have 60% more time. So this was very unsettling, because let's say we fixed with the firmware the motion. That's great. Motion is working flawlessly. All of a sudden, flood is on the fritz. So it was a nightmare. So, but we got it done, and Bruce, Professor, do you have any questions?
Sure. So some of the things you talked about, getting things done parsimoniously, by expanding the network, by getting people to believe in you, that kind of being able to share your vision and get people is something we're talking about a lot. One thing that I think would be helpful is a lot of students in going through this kind of don't know what they don't know. How long? I love that last quote. Just if you're 95% complete doesn't mean you only have 5% of time left. Could be 60%. So, one thing like that old adage, everything costs twice as much and takes twice as long. It's actually probably much more than that. But can you talk about some real hard numbers, like something that you thought would be X amount, looking at it from a consumer perspective, and on a business side it was so much more, at least initially, even if you were able to negotiate down minimal order quantities, what some of the times that you thought you know, would be X days, how and why they turned out to be so long. So some of those, you know, unexpected things, and anywhere where you could put in, like, you know, actual dollars, actual time frame versus what you, your educated guess told you it would be.
Right. Well, that's an excellent question, and I think there were numerous situations where this happened, and I think I attribute it to a great extent because it's a tech product. And not patting myself on the back or Mike on the back, but I think even people with a lot of tech experience would have experienced the same problems. But one example would be firmware development. We had a wonderful firmware developer. He was doing a great job. We didn't have contingency plans to have a backup firmware developer because in a big business you would do that, but we just, you know, he was in his 20s in great health. Well, he had a backache, and it turned out to be spinal cancer. Now, thankfully, he has recovered, and I stay in touch with him on a regular basis, and he's doing very, very well. But when we were just about ready to complete the project with the firmware, he came down with this diagnosis and immediately could not do anything. So therefore, we had to find a new firmware developer, and Pranay found Dharam, who was excellent, and he had to go through a few people before he found Dharam, but within 60 days he had Dharam doing a great job. But Dharam, with coding, what I've learned, it's like an art form. Very hard to bring a new coder to work on the old person's work. You know, this is, so he tried to do that. He wasted a month. I didn't really understand that at the time. Had I done some more research, I think I would have done. He said, look, I got to start from scratch. Started from scratch, you know, Mohit's been working on this a year and a half. He says, I got to start from scratch because I just don't understand how he did it. I'm not criticizing what he did. You know, he was highly skilled, had a master's degree in embedded firmware and all that, but I got to start from scratch. So he started it from scratch, you know, and that was a very, very expensive undertaking for us. Probably added $20,000 to the, which is very inexpensive if you considered a U.S. developer, because the cost of a quality firmware or software developer in India is, let's say, $2,000 a month. So you're talking maybe 24 grand a year. You don't have to pay health care, you don't have to pay FICA, you know, it's just a straight expense, which is why, you know, many of the politicians in America and others are quite annoyed, and I can see to a certain extent, because, you know, we're taking the job away from someone in the States who's making 100 grand a year. And, you know, but the argument I would make, and I see both sides, but the argument I would make is that Oval would never come to fruition had we had to pay someone 100 grand a year. And quite frankly, who in the world, let's say you're making 80 grand a year, and you say, gosh, this Oval company has a few bucks that we think, and I'm going to go over there for 100 grand a year. You know, we could be out of business the next month. We're not Google, we're not Apple. So, you know, if you're graduating from Pace and you've got, you know, a software background, are you going to go with Oval and leave your, you know, job that has that's a stable company? I don't think so. So that was one issue. Another issue we had was water resistance. Our ad hoc experts told us, sure, you can make this nearly waterproof, this sensor housing. And we thought, gosh, what a wonderful thing to say to the world, right? Okay, we were told that's no problem. Well, our engineer, KK, based on what we said was the mandate, endeavored to work on water resistance. And you know, he is so diligent and he doesn't want to fail. So he spent months and months trying to perfect water resistance. At the end of the day, he couldn't do it because we wanted to detect flood. So what did we do? We created an external flood detector which plugs in to the sensor, and then the sensor can be placed above where the water is. Stick it to the wall, and then the sensor, and then this little flood detector, which costs very, very little money to manufacture, next to nothing, basically was our solution. Now that horrible mistake actually has turned out to be a big benefit, because what can we do now? We can develop other external sensors down the road to detect carbon monoxide, smoke, oil levels for home heating oil. There are a lot of different opportunities. So that actually was okay, but that didn't cost us so much money outlay, but it cost us months of time. And you know, KK always thought he was just on the verge of getting it done. Then you do the test, and then you see that the water seeps into the hardware. Another problem that we had was battery life. That was just a horrible, horrible crisis, and led to many sleepless nights on my part, because I kid you not, when we were with the new firmware guy, Darum, the battery life, which had been much longer with the previous firmware guy, we were looking and saying, oh my gosh, it's 2 days. We can't launch this product. What happened? We had a much longer battery life. And you know, we were hearing all the explanations which were correct, but it was creating an internal panic. Well, thankfully, Darum figured out what the problem was using his new firmware, and now we have a satisfactory battery life. So that's the flood detector that simply attaches to the sensor, and then you can put it in the seam of a window or you know wherever. And you know, it's peanuts to manufacture, but we can use it as a gift with purchase. We can sell it. Right now we have it, I think, at $39, and you know, it's a nice value added. And if we want to do a promotion, we can always say get a free flood detector, and you know, that's one option.
There's so many, one thing we talk about, you know, in the class is the idea of getting out and speaking to the customer. The impetus for this was some very real problem that you saw with drugs in the counter. Since with so many different applications, did you get out and talk to people? For example, was there a request when you talk to customers to have a waterproof sensor or to have a humidity or water sensor? How did customer input or feedback drive the design, the features, the options, et cetera, the pricing, or did it not, and that's still an ongoing kind of learning process?
Well, we did a lot of anecdotal marketing research. It should have been more formalized. You know, you like to make excuses and say, well, we don't have the expertise or the time to do it, but I would say that that's a mistake. You can always figure out how to do something formalized. I mean, look, do that next to nothing. With Take and Slide, we've done studies very inexpensively. You know, I got a PhD from Rutgers in marketing research to conduct a study, and it was inexpensive. So I think we should have done more formal studies, as imperfect as they are. It's always good as a discipline. It also, we should have done formal focus groups. That being said, I spoke to many, many people informally about, you know, what do you think of it? You know, I spoke to executives at CVS. I spoke to my pharmaceutical contacts about that. We spoke to people that were concerned about humidity and protecting valuable artwork and that kind of thing, and furniture. I got strong insight about security from lawyers and solo practitioner accountants who said they'd like to have another layer of, or micro layer of security in addition to ADT, where their files are going to be protected. Spoke to a number of people in the mental health field, a lot of the social workers and psychologists don't digitize their records, they're hard copy. They're operating in a low-tech environment. What additional layer of security do they have to protect patient files? This was a big thing. So I was hearing that as well.
And then that leads to a problem that some might think is nice to have, but when you're an entrepreneur with limited resources, limited time, limited money, is which one to go after, because it's nice to say it could do so many different things on a consumer side, on a manufacturer side, on a wholesale side, on so many different industries, and it could, and clearly with this, it can have so many purposes. Given limited time, limited resources, need to focus strategically, how are you trying to position the company and target the sectors, the space, the purpose that you want to go after, whether that's the low-hanging fruit, whether it's the segment that may be most profitable, the segment that may be fastest to adopt it. So as this can do so many things for so many different segments, both retail, wholesale, industry, etc., how do you decide as a strategic manager where to spend your time and effort and money and focus?
Yeah, well, that's again a fine question, and in retrospect, we should have kept the concept more simple. And the feedback I'm getting, we showed it to the Staples buyer. Staples has thousands of stores. They've got a great online presence. And they said, how do we explain to the consumer as they're walking by what this does? If you had just said flood detector, that's enough messaging. If we had focused on the opioid epidemic and just said medicine cabinet monitoring and maybe alcohol cabinet monitoring, kept it very simple. People don't have the time. There's a sort of like an ADHD going on with people, and I have close business friends that we chit-chat all the time. They say, Rich, get to the point. I want to hear it in 30 seconds, okay? The elevator pitch is too long.
Yep.
And, they're being bombarded, with all of this stimuli on the internet. And, you can watch YouTube and people are so polished, they don't want to hear the story. So if we were to do it again, I think even though the product is fantastic, from a marketing standpoint, we would have done that. Now, what are we doing now? Well, we need sales. So we're getting plenty of calls from people, and we sort of are just focusing on taking those calls. We have one, and I'm particularly intrigued by the business-to-business vertical. I'm a little bit concerned about the consumer vertical, although you could make an argument that that's good too. But you got the big boys that if they see that we're successful in there, Apple and Samsung and others, are we going to just be their test marketers? So maybe it's better to be a stealth marketer and go after, like we have one company that does rat traps. Rodent infestation. I never thought about rodent infestation, but it's an issue here. It's an issue all over the world. And they said this would be fantastic to put into the drop ceilings, to monitor it when the rodents are going around, and then we can provide proof through the metrics that the restaurateur has to put in a trap. And we're not going to put in a trap unless we notice movement and we can break the light pattern and those kinds of things. And there are the opportunity to sell tens of thousands of units just in that vertical. And that's something that probably an Apple or a Samsung is just not going to be interested in. But it's a non-sexy vertical, but it's a lucrative vertical. And you're dealing with business people where if there's a malfunction in the app or whatever, you're going to be talking to their IT people. You're not going to be dealing with an angry consumer. So I think the B2B sector is a good one. Now, Professor Backenheimer had recommended to one of his colleagues that I speak at the New York Science Academy Challenge 2030. Well, lo and behold, by going there, I met a member of the Chris Christie administration who interacts regularly with Chris Christie. And as we know, he's a rather unpopular governor in many ways, but one thing that Democrats and Republicans can concur on is that he has a passion about opioid abuse. And he's been very eloquent in talking about it, and I think his message is genuine, sincere, and right on target. So I talked to Ken, who came from Rutgers and is a PhD, and he believes strongly in having oval as one option to monitor medicine cabinets. So maybe what we have to do is get rid of the other sensor functions and keep it more simple. The costs will go down. But I firmly believe, they say, and I hate to go with all these acronyms, but the KISS principle is true. It really is. And engineers, we love them, but there's that feature creep mentality. Oh, we can do this, we can do that, we can do that. And you hear that all the time. And of course, I bought into it. I love, it's also ego. You got to get rid of the ego. You got to be humble, 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 and don't feel you can do all this. And as tempting as it is, really try to keep it simple. And especially if you're a small company, keep your niche in mind. With the take and slide, what do? We just focus on pharmaceutical companies giving it away. That's it. Nothing else, and it's enough to do. And I think the same, we could learn, from Oval.